kicking off the show, joining us is one of the Dave Isaacs, of course. There's a Dave Isaac that you guys know out here in Phoenix, but there's also a Dave Isaac from Philly. And kicking things off is Dave Isaac from Philly. And Dave, it's been a while.
It has. Dave Isaac from Philly in Buffalo. Yeah.
There you go, yeah. So both the Dave Isaacs joining forces in Buffalo for the NHL draft, which, has concluded now. But, Dave, it's sort of an interesting time. History was made with Austin Matthews going first overall. Now, obviously, being from Scottsdale, being out here, it's just amazing how hockey has really been taking off over the many years here on the West Coast and in Arizona, which actually youth hockey really for the last 20 years has been great in the West, but now really showing to everyone out there. But any extra buzz there at the draft in Buffalo about, Austin Matthews, because of where he grew up?
Oh, certainly a little bit because of where he grew up, but a lot because of where he was selected in the draft, going first overall to the Toronto Maple Leafs, probably the biggest media market in the entire NHL. So he was getting tons of attention. But you're right, talking about youth hockey and I don't know what the correct term is, maybe non-traditional markets, like you're saying there in Arizona. And yesterday in the first round, there were 5 players selected from the St. Louis area. So it's a great time for USA Hockey. I was meeting with some of the folks from USA Hockey this morning, and they said that they've hit record numbers in terms of attendance in the USA Hockey program and a record number at the lowest age level from the 6 to 8 year olds. So they're getting into the sport even younger now, which obviously you get more talent, more practice time, and things of that nature, and that's how you get a bunch of Americans being taken so early in the draft.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was amazing hearing about St. Louis as well, and later on in the draft, even other not just American players, but other Arizona situations, and so it's just exciting to really see this. And we see kids from Southern California drafted as well, and just the big takeoff that 99 did in 1988. When he got traded to LA. Obviously, hockey started booming there, and then the Sun Belt teams come in, and with the Coyotes joining them, the other California teams, all that good stuff. And youth hockey really began taking off there. And I, again, remember out here when I was playing youth hockey, even in the 90s there, just right around the time the Coyotes moved here. But even before that, I recall, just, teams up there in Canada and the East Coast, knew about some of the Phoenix teams coming in, and the talent level was already amazing. And so great to see that there, especially with Austin Matthews. And, now, Dave, with the Flyers, of course, you're covering the Flyers. And last year, got into the playoff spot after a tough start to the year. But what's really in store for them this offseason, to kind of keep pace? Because it's a tough Metropolitan Division, and, teams in the Atlantic Division as well will be looking to improve. And what do the Flyers really need to do to kind of keep pace and get back into the playoffs for the second year in a row?
Well, Greg, I think the first thing that they need to do is find a big scoring winger in free agency, and that's probably not going to come at a price that Ron Hextall's comfortable with. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually do that, or if they kind of play it cheap and bring one of their young players in or something like that. That's what'll keep them kind of in the conversation and not taking a step back, which I think they're kind of in danger of doing when you look at the landscape of the rest of the Metropolitan Division. The Stanley Cup champion is in the Metropolitan Division now, the Pittsburgh Penguins. So the Flyers certainly need to keep pace, and I think that's going to be the first step for them in doing so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's just tough, when with free agency and all the cap situations around the National Hockey League, the teams close to the cap, and then you have the teams that have a lot of room available, but sometimes they're not contenders. So it's a kind of a interesting situation that goes on with that. And, of course, we're speaking with Dave Isaac at Dave G. Isaac on Twitter, and, of course, covering the Philadelphia Flyers for the Courier-Post. And now looking at that, as you mentioned, with the price range of free agents out there and with, what Ron Hextall may be comfortable with, I mean, do you see, because he's a guy that would seem to fit the Flyer style, plus he played on L.A. last year, and we know about the unofficial partnership they have, but Milan Lucic is a possibility, maybe that guy that they try to maybe put more money at than maybe they normally would, or do you see a situation because of Lucic being a power forward in the fact that sometimes that style of play affects guys where once they hit their early 30s, they already slow down a bit, could be an issue, or, what do you think about a guy like that?
Yeah, I don't know if the age and the tread in the tires is as much of a problem as term and price on a contract like that would be for Ron Hextall. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens for some of these teams that are in bad situations this summer, what they do in free agency and the players that they bring in, because there's going to be a protection list for the expansion draft in Las Vegas next summer. And I think there are probably some teams that are a little wary of acquiring somebody and then losing them a year later if they don't protect them. So if the Flyers, were to pony up big money and pay Milan Lucic, I would certainly think that they would protect him. But I don't believe Ron Hextall is willing to do something like that. So I would be surprised if Lucic ended up being a Flyer at the start of next season. Certainly, I think he's looking at a smaller price. I think Jimmy Vesey is really the guy that is top of the Flyers list, the winger that was drafted by Nashville and already declared that he wouldn't sign with them, and he'll become a free agent on August 15th because he'll be a restricted free agent. But that's kind of more Ron Hextall's wheelhouse, a guy with a high upside and an entry-level contract that wouldn't break the bank.
Now, with VC, his rights when traded to Buffalo a week or so ago, do you think that he's, Buffalo, even though they have a lot of young assets, so giving up the third-round pick to them, to Nashville, probably isn't the end of the world, but is there confidence that you feel that he probably will end up signing now with Buffalo, or maybe hope, as you said, because of the Flyers' interest in him, that perhaps he doesn't sign there and still becomes a free agent there? I think it would be August 15th for him.
Yeah, I think it's not just the Flyers. I think every team's going to have interest in him, and his representatives have already come out and said that that trade didn't change anything, even though he's good buddies with Jack Eichel, the Buffalo Sabres, that they still expect that Jimmy Vesey will become a free agent on August 15th. And it's an interesting scenario because he's going to be an entry-level contract. Everybody is going to load that contract up with bonuses. The contract itself is going to be pretty much identical wherever it is that he goes. So it's a free agent that's not necessarily looking for a payday. He's looking for the best fit and for a team that's in a good situation to win. And that's kind of rare. You're usually looking at somebody who's trying to pitch both against one another, both the opportunity to win and money. And here it's just going to be the opportunity to win, or whatever he feels is the best fit, whether it's the Boston Bruins, where he went to college in Boston, or somewhere else. It'll be interesting to see what exactly happens there, but it sounds like he's going to become a free agent one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely, with VC there. And in terms of the trade route, with the Flyers, do they have excess young defensemen or the type of assets out there that can acquire, if available, maybe a 24, 25-year-old forward if they're not able to sign VC, that could get into their top six? I mean, are those assets there to make a deal of that magnitude if the right guy's available? If the right guy's available, they might be able to pull it off with one of their young defensemen. The Flyers do have a lot of them. I would think Ivan Provorov, who they selected 7th overall last year, is probably going to make the team this year. I think he's untouchable. Shane Gostisbehere, who was one of the finalists for the Calder Trophy, he's obviously untouchable as well. As for the rest of them, I suppose if something really stuck out at Ron Hextall, he might do something like that. But I think that in terms of roster players that are on there right now, they're not really good fits for anybody because of some of the
contracts that these guys have. I don't see too many teams breaking down the door to trade for Matt Reed or to trade for Mark Strait. So I don't think that Ron Hextall has that many assets available to him in terms of a trade if he's looking to retain his young players. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It's not quite the same scenario as the Coyotes, who picked up Tony DeAngelo today, because he's a guy that only spent 1 year in the AHL and was already pining for playing time.
Hi, Dave. I wanted to ask you, just like last year, the Flyers, they were active on the first night of the draft. Instead of moving up, they moved down, and they got the guy that they wanted. Now, everybody always says that, but I'll let you pronounce his full name. Out of all, I think they have 10 draft picks. Do they expect any of them to come in immediately and help out the Flyers, or are we talking maybe a year for some of these guys, or how's it looking for?
Yeah, at least a year. They ended up with 11 draft picks, and they traded one to the Islanders, and they'll get it back next year. So they ended up with 10 draft selections. And the guy that they selected was German Rubtsov, who's a Russian center. And he ended up falling in a lot of teams' draft boards because there was a scandal with the Russian junior team a couple of months ago, in a doping scandal where the coaching staff ended up giving a specific drug to every player, and they all were tested positive for the same drug, and the entire team was replaced. So that caused him to fall in a lot of people's draft boards, but apparently the Flyers went in and did some intensive research on this guy, and the Flyers liked everything that they saw, so they ended up turning a third-round pick into a second-round pick and falling 4 spots back and got the guy anyway. And you're right, that's at least what Ron Hextall is telling us, but getting to know him a little bit and the way that he was talking about all this research he was doing, he said it was more research than he's ever done on anything before. It sounds like a story that checks out, but he still has 2 years left on his contract in Russia. He's trying to get out of it, but the Flyers aren't optimistic that that's going to be the case. So even if he could, he wouldn't be in the NHL next season, certainly. But I think it's at least 2 years for all of these guys that they traded or that they drafted yesterday and today.
One guy that I was a little surprised at, because they drafted 3 goalies last year, wasn't it? They took Carter Hart, and if I'm reading correctly, it wasn't he the first goalie taken, and then maybe a little surprised if the Flyers took another goalie.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the time, but Ron Hextall said there was a certain point where, he kept falling and we just couldn't ignore him, and he was still there, and the Flyers took him. It wasn't part of their plan, but it was the guy that they talked about for the last couple of weeks, and when he was still there, where he was in the second round there, they said, we just got to take him. And Ron Hextall's usually pretty low-key in how he talks about expectations for a lot of these guys. But he said that Carter Hart has the makings of a number 1 goaltender one day. So that, to me, spoke volumes, because that's something that he's not usually willing to say. So the fact that he wasn't part of the plan, Carter Hart, from the start, and that the Flyers jumped on him when they did, and Ron Hextall saying that, obviously they're very high on this guy. But I think, like I said, all of these guys are going to take at least a couple of years. Hart's, I believe, 18 years old. He's part of the Canadian National Junior Camp a couple of weeks ago. So the World Juniors coming up this year. He's got a shot at being on that roster, and we'll see what happens from there.
Oh, yeah, especially, as you said, with goaltenders, take longer to develop, and, developing these guys properly at any position, as you said, usually a couple of years, and you'll start seeing some of them reach the NHL level. And of course, we're speaking with Dave Isaac, covering the Flyers for the Courier-Post. On Twitter, Dave G. Isaac. And, of course, we're related somehow. I don't know if we know for sure if it's like third cousins, 2 once removed. You have the other Dave Isaac out there in Buffalo as well. And, he's calling in, but we'll kind of split you guys up a little to avoid extra confusion. So one last question, Dave from Philly. But in terms of buzz at the draft, obviously with some of the players, Austin Matthews, guys drafted, and obviously what Columbus did, and the fact kind of passing over Pajari, going for Dubois. was there buzz about a certain team or two that kind of stood out around other media out there that, people were impressed by or just shocked by? I mean, obviously maybe the Columbus situation, but anything else that kind of stood out to you or any of the other media there?
I think the Columbus thing stuck out a little bit. I think Matthew Tkachuk going to Calgary seemed like a good fit to a lot of people. It's really difficult to tell in the NHL. I think it's difficult to tell in the NFL when you start trying to evaluate a draft so early. And in the NFL, at least a lot of those guys are impactful players on that team the next year. With hockey, there's usually, maybe 3 guys in the first round that end up playing in the NHL that next season. So it's one of those things where, several years down the line, you'll be able to look back and say, man, that was a really good draft, or that was a really poor draft, or can you believe that this guy ended up getting picked in the 4th round and he's one of the top players in the game? I mean, the game ends up changing. I mean, back when he was drafted, Johnny Gaudreau, a lot of teams were looking at him like, can't afford to take a small guy that soon, as the Calgary Flames did in the 3rd round, or the 4th round rather. But now he's obviously one of the best players in the game. So I think it's tough to try and handicap all that right now. I don't think there's many teams that a lot of media members are looking at and saying, man, they had a really good draft. I think it's just too difficult to project all of those players because there's so many moving parts. I mean, they're still teenagers. At least in the NFL, these are guys that are college age, certainly much bigger. That's something that we probably won't have an answer to for several years.
Oh, yeah. Player development here is huge. And, how teams, work with these young guys and as the young guys mature over time. So it's a very exciting time, though, and I know we'll see a busy trade activity, obviously, during the draft, but leading up to free agency July 1st, I think we'll see a lot of good action there, and it's going to be very exciting. And Dave, it was good to talk to you again. We'll have to have you on in the next couple of weeks to break down all the offseason movement that we'll see here soon. And if you're still in Buffalo, have a safe trip back to Philly or wherever you're going afterwards, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Dave.
And, of course, that's Dave Isaac from Philly covering the Flyers with the Courier-Post. Related to me somehow, either second cousin once removed, third cousin, fourth. Somehow we are. We'll figure it out one day, but he does a great job covering the Flyers. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Dave G. Isaac, ISAAC.